Grace's journey, from ashes to Love, devastating. Blaze reduced my home to ruins at age 65, when I turned to my son for shelter. He refused, saying his fiancée required her space. In desperation, I reached out to my first love, a man I hadn't contacted in 40 years. As he welcomed me at his mansion door, he uttered 3 simple words: "You've come home." That moment transformed my entire existence. But first, please subscribe to our channel and share in the comments which part of the world you're watching from. We're always curious to see how far our content reaches. I'm Grace, and at 65, I believed I'd already weathered every storm life could send my way. How mistaken I was. Everything began on an ordinary Wednesday in Charlotte, North Carolina. While preparing my usual afternoon coffee in the kitchen, an unusual smell caught my attention. Assuming I'd left something burning on the stove, I went to investigate. Opening the living room door revealed a dense wall of smoke that completely obscured my vision. Fire was already devouring the curtains and climbing the walls at an alarming speed that left me momentarily frozen. The smoke detector remained silent. Discovered later its battery had expired months earlier. Such a minor oversight would ultimately strip me of every possession I owned. Racing back to the kitchen, I frantically searched for the phone to contact emergency services. The smoke had infiltrated everywhere, choking my lungs and clouding my thoughts. The sound of shattering glass made me realize escape was my only option. The hungry flames were consuming my house with unstoppable intensity. Survival became my singular focus. I snatched my purse from the kitchen table and rushed toward the back entrance. My final glimpse before bursting outside was Robert's portrait, my late husband, beginning to char from the intense heat. My neighbors had already gathered in the street when I emerged, choking and struggling for air. Mrs. Jenkins, my elderly 78-year-old neighbor, immediately rushed to embrace me as we both helplessly witnessed the inferno destroying the home I'd occupied for over 4 decades. Emergency responders arrived within 10 minutes, though by then it was too late to save anything. They successfully prevented the fire from spreading to adjacent properties. But my home was beyond rescue. Within 60 minutes, 40 years of cherished memories had been reduced to rubble. The kitchen table where David completed his schoolwork, the walls marking my son's growth through the years, the bedroom I'd shared with Robert for 37 years all vanished. I stood wrapped in someone's donated blanket on the sidewalk, watching firefighters battle the blaze. The fire chief later explained it was likely an electrical short circuit in an aging living room outlet, a simple malfunction that had devastated my entire life. When the flames finally subsided, only a blackened, smoldering skeleton remained. The fire chief approached, his face covered in soot, his expression filled with sympathy I couldn't process in that moment. "I'm deeply sorry, ma'am. We exhausted every option," he said, though no further explanation was necessary. The destruction spoke for itself. Complete and total loss. Everything I possessed beyond the clothes I wore and my purse contents had disappeared. Fortunate neighbors who still had homes offered assistance that first night. Kind Mrs. Jenkins insisted I stay with her, though her compact apartment was already crowded with visiting grandchildren. The American Red Cross had established emergency shelters, but the thought of sleeping in a gymnasium surrounded by strangers intensified my sense of displacement. That's when I knew calling David was necessary. My son resides approximately 40 minutes away in Valentine, an affluent Charlotte suburb featuring tree-lined avenues and magazine-worthy homes. He relocated there 4 years earlier following his promotion to regional manager at his insurance firm. Our relationship wasn't close, not the bond mothers and sons should share, but he represented my only remaining family. I borrowed Mrs. Jenkins' phone since mine had melted with everything else. "David, sweetheart, it's Mom," I managed, my voice weaker than intended. "Mom, what's happening? You sound distressed." "There's been a fire, son. The house is destroyed. Everything's gone." An agonizing pause followed. "Are you injured?" "No, I'm unharmed. Just minor scrapes and a scratchy throat from smoke inhalation. But I need somewhere to stay while I sort things out. Just temporarily." Another lengthy pause. "Of course, Mom. Come over. We'll figure something out." The overwhelming relief that washed over me nearly caused me to collapse. My son would help me. Despite our emotional distance, all the missed calls, and uncomfortable holiday gatherings, he was still my child. The following morning, I spent staring at the charred remains, awaiting the insurance adjuster's arrival. He appeared promptly at 9 a.m., a young man who seemed uncomfortable, surveying my home's remnants with a clipboard and camera. "Complete loss," he stated as if those words didn't encompass my entire existence. What's the settlement? I asked, dreading his response. Well, your policy covers approximately $200,000 for the structure, but factoring in your deductible and depreciation, we're looking at roughly $90,000, possibly less. $90,000 to reconstruct 42 years of living. It seemed impossible. Mrs. Jenkins helped me purchase basic clothing and toiletries, using emergency funds from the Red Cross. My entire worldly possessions now fit into one small borrowed suitcase. That was everything, all that remained of the life I'd constructed. The drive to David's house felt like traveling to an unfamiliar country. Everything appears different when you have nowhere to return to. Familiar landmarks: the gas station where I regularly bought lottery tickets, the diner where Robert and I enjoyed Sunday breakfasts, all seemed to belong to someone else's memories now. David's neighborhood maintained its usual perfection. Immaculate lawns, pristine sidewalks, flawless lives continuing exactly as before. I felt like an outsider, bringing my catastrophe into their spotless world. His house was a two-story colonial with white shutters and a red door Victoria his fiancée had selected. I'd met her precisely 3 times during their 2-year relationship. She was 32, his 39. She worked at a downtown marketing agency and had strong opinions on everything from wall colors to dinner wine selections. I pulled the taxi into their driveway and sat motionless for a moment, gathering courage. This is temporary, I reminded myself, just until I can determine my next steps, just until the insurance settlement arrives and I can find a modest apartment somewhere. I never imagined that approaching my son's front door with my small borrowed suitcase would become one of life's most difficult moments. But as I raised my hand to knock, a familiar sinking sensation overwhelmed me, the same hollow feeling from when Robert died, as though the ground were vanishing beneath my feet. I just didn't realize yet how much deeper I was about to fall. David opened the door before I could knock, as if he'd been watching for my arrival. For one brief moment, seeing his familiar face, Robert's eyes, my own determined chin, made me believe everything might work out. He was my son, my only child. Surely blood meant something. Mom, he said, stepping aside, though his voice carried something indefinable. Distance, perhaps, or discomfort. Victoria appeared behind him almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting nearby. She wore white jeans and a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her brown hair was pulled into one of those artfully messy buns that somehow looked perfectly styled. Her smile never quite reached her eyes. Grace, how terrible about your house, she said, though she was examining my worn suitcase, not me. David told me everything. I set my suitcase down in their immaculate entryway, suddenly aware of my appearance. My newly purchased clothes, cheap and simple, seemed out of place against the polished marble floors. I could still smell smoke clinging to my hair despite showering at Mrs. Jenkins' house. It's just temporary, I said quickly, just until I get back on my feet. David and Victoria exchanged a glance, one of those wordless spousal conversations that excludes everyone else. I'd shared countless such looks with Robert, but from the outside, it felt like exclusion from a secret club. Let's sit down and discuss this, David said, guiding me into the living room. Their house possessed the kind of beauty found in magazines. Everything coordinated perfectly. Nothing appeared out of place. White furniture that looked unused, glass coffee tables reflecting light from spotlessly clean windows, the kind of house where you're afraid to touch anything. I perched on the edge of the pristine sofa, my new shoes firmly planted on the flawless hardwood floors. Victoria noticed and winced slightly. So, what's your plan? David asked, settling into the armchair across from Minot, beside me on the sofa where he could have comforted his distressed mother, but opposite me, as if conducting a business meeting. Well, the insurance adjuster indicated processing will take several weeks, maybe a month. I was hoping to stay here until then, just until I locate a small apartment or something. The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably long. I watched Victoria's expression change, her jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. She leaned over and placed her hand on David's arm, a gesture appearing supportive but clearly possessive. Mom, David began, his tone immediately signaling heartbreak ahead. The thing is, Victoria and I have been discussing this, and we really treasure our privacy here. We work demanding hours, and this is our sanctuary, you understand. I blinked, struggling to comprehend. I wouldn't intrude. I'd stay out of your way. I'll help with cooking and cleaning. I won't be troublesome. Victoria leaned forward, her voice soft yet firm. It's not about being troublesome, Grace. It's about space. This house is our first home together, and we're still establishing our rhythm as a couple. I'm his mother, I said, the words emerging, sharper than intended. Of course you are, Victoria replied smoothly, and that's precisely why we thought you'd be more comfortable elsewhere. Somewhere, you can have independence while you rebuild. I looked at David, expecting him to contradict her, to remember that I was the woman who stayed up through every fever, who worked double shifts to afford his college textbooks, who held his hand through his divorce 3 years ago when his ex-wife left him for her personal trainer. Instead, he nodded. Victoria's right, Mom. We think you'd be happier with your own space. The words struck me like a physical blow. I actually felt my chest constrict as if someone were crushing my lungs. Happier, David? I lost everything yesterday. Everything. And you think I'd be happier alone in a hotel room than here with my family? It doesn't have to be a hotel, Victoria said quickly. There are lovely extended stay facilities near the mall, very clean, very safe, with kitchenettes so you can prepare your own meals. I stared at this woman, who'd only been in my son's life for 2 years, telling me where I should live after losing my home. And how am I supposed to afford this lovely extended stay facility? The insurance settlement won't arrive for weeks. David shifted uncomfortably. I could help with that. A few $100s to get you started. A few $100s, as if I were a distant relative he barely knew, not the woman who gave him life. David, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, I changed your diapers. I rocked you through colic. I taught you to ride a bike and helped with homework. I held you when you cried because Lucia Velasco broke your heart in high school. His face twisted slightly, but Victoria squeezed his arm harder. No one's questioning your history, she said. We just think everyone would be more comfortable with some boundaries. Boundaries. I'd heard that word from David's therapist after his divorce. Everything was about boundaries. You're rejecting me, I said flatly. We're not rejecting you, David protested. We're just saying this arrangement might not work for anyone. Whose idea was this? I asked, though I already knew. I could see it in how Victoria leaned back slightly, satisfied, as if she'd won something. We discussed it together, David said, avoiding my eyes. I stood slowly, my knees cracking in a way that reminded me I was 65 and alone in the world. I understand, Mom. Don't be like that. We're trying to do what's best for everyone. What's best for everyone? I repeated the words as if they were foreign. What would be best for everyone, David, is if your mother didn't have to sleep on the street tonight. Victoria's perfectly made-up face contorted into concern. You don't have to sleep on the street. Like I said, there are options. I looked around the flawless living room one final time, at the family photos featuring David and Victoria, but none of me, at the expensive furniture no one was permitted to truly use, at my son who had chosen this cold, beautiful woman over his own mother. You're right, I finally said. There are always options. I picked up my small suitcase, its weight feeling heavier now that I knew where I wasn't wanted. David stood, looking uneasy, but not uneasy enough to change his decision. I'll call you in a few days, he said. Once you get settled somewhere. Don't bother, I said, surprised by my steady voice. I wouldn't want to invade your sanctuary. Victoria had the decency to look slightly ashamed, but not enough to speak up, not enough to say, wait, this is wrong. She's your mother. I walked out of that perfect house with its perfect couple and its perfect boundaries and stood on the sidewalk for a long time before I could force myself to move. Through the front window, I could see David and Victoria talking, probably about how difficult I was being, how much drama I was bringing into their peaceful lives. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent years after Robert died convincing myself I was strong and independent, that I didn't need anyone. Now, when I truly needed help, I discovered that independence is a luxury you can only afford when you have choices. I walked to a modest budget hotel nearby and spent nearly all my remaining money on a room for the night. Sitting on the hard bed, staring at the peeling walls, I tried to figure out where a 65-year-old woman with almost no money and only one suitcase of cheap clothes was supposed to go. That's when I remembered the business card I'd carried in my wallet for nearly 40 years, miraculously saved because it was with me during the fire, yellowed with age and soft from being handled so many times. A card I never thought I'd actually use, from a man I loved when the world was young and everything seemed possible. Randall Galloway, the man who promised to return for me one day before life intervened, and that day never arrived. I'd spent 3 nights in that cheap hotel before finding the courage to make the call. 3 nights waking with a sore back from the thin mattress and the taste of shame in my mouth. 3 nights listening to arguments in the hallway and constant traffic noise outside the poorly insulated window. 3 nights washing my few new clothes in the small bathroom and hanging them to dry on the room's single chair. The business card felt fragile as tissue paper between my fingers, worn smooth from 4 decades of being carried but never used. Randall Galloway was written in faded blue ink. Beneath that, a phone number with an unfamiliar area code. On the back, in my own youthful handwriting, never forget. Gee, I had written those words at 25, believing with absolute certainty that Randall Galloway would be the great love of my life. He was 26, with dark hair falling over his forehead and eyes the color of golden amber. He worked for his father's construction company after college and dreamed of bigger things, of building something meaningful. We dated for 9 months, which at 25 felt like an eternity. He used to take me to the overlook on the hills outside the city, where we'd sit on his car hood and discuss our plans. I'm going to start my own business, he'd tell me. Something in construction or real estate development. Something that makes me wealthy enough to give you everything you deserve. I'll come back for you, Grace, he promised the night before leaving for a project in Atlanta. I'm going to make something of myself. Then I'll come back and marry you. But promises at 25 have a habit of fading when reality intervenes. He wrote letters initially long, passionate letters full of dreams and plans. I wrote back, telling him about my bank job, about how I was waiting as promised. Then the letters grew shorter, less frequent. When I met Robert 6 months later at a church event, Randall felt like a beautiful dream I'd once had, too good to be real. Robert was steady and reliable, already 32 with a good job at the phone company. He didn't promise me the world, but he promised me a house, a family, security. When he proposed after 5 months of dating, I said yes. I placed Randall's business card in my wedding dress, pocketa, secret talisman. I couldn't bring myself to discard now. 40 years later, sitting in a cheap hotel room smelling of dampness and stale cigarettes, I wondered what had become of that dreamy man with amber eyes. I'd followed him sporadically over the years, the way you do with first loves, through mutual acquaintances. I heard he'd fulfilled his promises, that he'd started a construction firm, that he'd become successful. He never married, which surprised people. Too busy building his empire, they'd say. Galloway was always ambitious. The last I heard, perhaps 8 years ago, his company had expanded beyond North Carolina into Atlanta, Georgia, and Miami, Florida. Galloway Development, constructing shopping centers and office complexes. The young man from the construction firm had become the kind of man who wore expensive suits and made decisions affecting hundreds of people. What would that man want with a 65-year-old widow staying in a budget hotel with nothing but a suitcase of Target clothes? The rational part of my brain said it was ridiculous, pathetic even. You don't call someone after 40 years because your life has fallen apart. You don't look up your young love when you're old, desperate, and homeless. But rational thought is a luxury when you're counting quarters in your purse, trying to figure out if you have enough for one more night's stay. On the 4th morning, I couldn't endure it anymore. My back ached from the hard mattress. The money was running out, and the hotel had warned they needed the room for an incoming booking the next day. I sat at the room's small table, staring at the card, my hands trembling beyond just the morning chill. What would I say? Hello, Randall. Remember me? I'm homeless now. Can you help? The number on the card was probably disconnected, or it would ring through to some secretary who would politely inform me that Mr. Galloway was far too important to take calls from random women claiming to have known him in their youth. But what if it wasn't? What if he answered? My heart pounded as I dialed. Each digit felt like stepping off a cliff. It rang once, twice. Galloway Development, Randall speaking. His voice was deeper now, shaped by time and responsibility, but unmistakably his. After 40 years, I would have recognized it anywhere. I almost hung up, almost pressed the end button, and searched for some other solution, but something in his tone, some warmth that seemed to reach through the phone and embrace me, made me speak. Randall, it's Grace. Grace Thorne. Well, I'm Grace Roberts now, but I used to be Thorne. Silence long enough for me to think the call had dropped. Or maybe he'd hung up, or maybe he had no idea who I was. Then, Grace, just my name, said like a prayer or a wonder, as if he couldn't believe it. I'm so sorry to call like this. I rushed, words tumbling out in desperation to explain before he could hang up. I know it's been a long time, and I probably shouldn't be calling, but I just didn't know who else to turn to. Where are you? He interrupted, his voice sharp with concern. I'm in Charlotte at a hotel called the Rest Stop, and I know this sounds crazy, but my house burned down last week. I lost everything, and my son doesn't want me staying with him, and I have nowhere to go. The words spilled out in a torrent, each one harder to say than the last. Admitting your own son had rejected you was like admitting you'd failed at the most fundamental human connection. Give me the exact address, Randall said, his voice now entirely professional. I'm coming to get you. You don't have to do that. I don't know why I called. I guess I just needed to hear a friendly voice. Grace. His tone allowed no discussion. Tell me where you are. I'm walking to my car right now. Over the phone, I could hear a door closing, an engine starting. He was really coming. This man I hadn't spoken to in 40 years was dropping whatever important business he was doing to rescue me from a budget hotel. I gave him the address, my voice barely audible. Randall, I'm not the girl you remember. Neither am I, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice, but I've been waiting 40 years for this call. After we hung up, I spent the next hour packing my few belongings, alternating between panic and disbelief. What was I doing? What were we doing? This was insane. You couldn't just resume a relationship after 4 decades, like you were continuing yesterday's conversation. But as I looked out the hotel window, waiting for a car I wouldn't recognize, carrying a man who might not recognize me, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the fire. Hope. Maybe it was foolish hope. Maybe it would lead to more disappointment, more heartbreak, but it was hope nonetheless. End at 65, with nothing left to lose. Hope was worth the risk. At exactly 10:45, a silver Mercedes pulled up in front of the hotel, gleaming and polished against the worn backdrop of the street. I peered out the window as the car parked, my heart beating against my ribs like a trapped bird. The windows were tinted so I couldn't see inside, but something deep in my chest told me it was him. The engine shut off, and the driver's door opened. Even after 40 years, even with gray hair and lines around his eyes, even carrying the weight of decades I hadn't shared with him, I recognized him immediately. Randall Galloway stepped out of that car as if stepping out of my dreams. As he looked up at the window where I stood, the years crumbled away between us as if they had never existed. I grabbed my suitcase and hurried down the stairs with the urgency of someone who fears a dream will vanish if she waits too long. He was standing by the car, waiting for me. Randall possessed the same relaxed confidence he'd had at 26, but now it was refined, polished by success and maturity. He wore dark jeans and a navy blue sweater that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, but his eyes, those amber eyes that had haunted my dreams for decades, were exactly the same. I wanted to hide. I wanted to retreat to the room and pretend this wasn't happening. I looked terrible. My hair hadn't been cut in months, my cheap clothes were wrinkled, and I felt small and insignificant compared to this elegant man waiting for me. But he was already smiling at me, a smile that made my heart leap as if I were 25 again. I walked toward him slowly, suddenly unable to breathe. "Hello, Grace," he said softly. I could see the changes time had made. His dark hair was now salt and pepper, cut short and professional. Lines framed the corners of his eyes and mouth. He was broader in the shoulders, more solid, as if success had given him physical presence along with everything else. But when he smiled at me, I saw the young man who used to take me to the Overlook and share his dreams. "Hello," I managed, my voice barely a whisper. He studied my face for a long moment, those amber eyes taking in every detail. I wanted to apologize for my appearance, for how far I'd fallen, for calling him after all these years with nothing to offer but trouble. Instead, he said 3 words that changed everything. "You look beautiful." I started to cry, right there on the sidewalk in front of that budget hotel with Randall Galloway standing next to me. I completely fell apart. 40 years of suppressed tears, 4 days of uncertainty and despair, a lifetime of being told I wasn't enough that all erupted in ugly, gasping sobs I couldn't control. He didn't say anything else. He didn't try to shush me or tell me everything would be fine. He simply took my suitcase with one hand and wrapped his other arm around me as I collapsed against his chest. He smelled of expensive cologne and clean laundry, of success and stability, of everything I had lost and everything I never had. His sweater was soft against my cheek, and his arms were strong around my trembling shoulders. "I'm sorry," I choked against his chest. "I'm sorry, Randall. I shouldn't have called. I shouldn't drag you into this mess." he murmured, his hand stroking my back. You should have called years ago. When the tears finally subsided, I pulled away to look at him, embarrassed by the damp patch I'd left on his expensive sweater. I must look like a disaster. He reached out and wiped a tear from my cheek, his touch gentle as a whisper. You look like someone who has been through hell and survived it. That's not a disaster, Grace, that's strength. I laughed, but it came out shaky and bitter. Strength? I'm 65, staying in a dive hotel because my own son doesn't want me. That's not strength, that's pathetic. His jaw tightened, and for a moment I saw a flash of anger he was trying to hide. Your son is a fool. You don't know him. I don't need to. I know you. He paused, his hands still resting lightly on my shoulders. Or at least I knew you, and the Grace Thorne I knew would never turn away someone in need, especially family. The way he said my maiden name, as if it was something precious he'd kept all these years, made my chest ache with longing for the woman I used to be. That was a long time ago, I said. I'm not that girl anymore. Maybe not, he agreed, but I'd like to meet the woman she became. He placed my suitcase in the trunk of his luxury car, as if it were treasure, not a cheap bag containing everything I had left in the world. As he opened the passenger door for me, I was momentarily stunned by the unreality of the situation. The morning of the fire, I had a house, memories, a life built over decades. Now I was getting into the car of a man I hadn't seen in 40 years with no idea what came next. Where are we going? I asked as he started the engine. Home, he said simply. The drive took almost an hour, passing through increasingly wealthy neighborhoods until we reached an area I'd never seen before. Rolling hills dotted with properties hidden behind stone walls and iron gates, trees that looked professionally placed, mailboxes that probably cost more than most people's cars. Randall turned into a long driveway marked only by a small brass plaque reading Galloway. The drive curved through mature trees and manicured gardens before opening into a circular entrance in front of a house that took my breath away. It wasn't flashy or ostentatious. It was elegant in the way real money is elegant, subtle, confident, built to last. Stone and wood with tall windows catching the afternoon light and a porch that invited you to sit and stay a while. Randall, I whispered, looking at this monument to everything he had achieved. This is incredible. He parked but didn't exit immediately. Instead, he sat there looking at the house as if seeing it through my eyes. It's too big, he said quietly. It always has been. I built it, thinking I'd fill it one day. He shrugged, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. Some dreams don't work out the way you planned. You're never married. The question slipped out before I could stop it. He turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. I came close a couple of times, but something was always missing. He paused, then said simply, you. The word hung between us in the silent car, charged with 40 years of what-ifs and might-have-beens. I wanted to ask what he meant. I wanted to understand how I could have been missing from a life I was never part of. But before I could find the words, he was already out of the car, coming around to open my door. The house was even more stunning inside. Hardwood floors gleaming like honey, high ceilings, furniture that looked like it belonged in architectural magazines but didn't feel cold or museum-like. There were books everywhere, comfortable reading, chairs placed near windows, photos scattered on side tables. It felt like a home where someone actually lived, not just a showcase for success. Are you hungry? Randall asked, leading me into a kitchen larger than my old living room. I was about to make lunch when you called. I realized I was starving. The hotel breakfast had been stale toast and weak coffee, and my stomach was cramping with emptiness and nerves. I don't want to be any trouble, I began, but he cut me off with a look. Grace, stop. You are not trouble. You are. He paused, searching for words. You are the answer to a question I've been asking for 40 years. While he cooked, he actually knew how to cook. Moving around that huge kitchen with practiced eye, studied the photographs scattered throughout the room. Randall at ribbon-cutting ceremonies, shaking hands with important people. Randall with various women at charity galas and business dinners, always smiling but never looking completely happy. Tell me about your life, he said, placing a plate of perfectly grilled chicken and roasted vegetables in front of me. Tell me about Robert, about your son, about everything I missed. So I did. Over a lunch that tasted like heaven after days of terrible hotel food, I told him about my marriage to Robert, steady and comfortable, giving me security and companionship, if not passion. I spoke about David, the baby I'd wanted so desperately and loved so fiercely, who grew up to be a stranger who valued his fiancé's comfort over his mother's needs. I told him about the years of being a good wife, a good mother, a good widow, about the fire that had taken everything I owned, and the son who had taken everything I had left. Randall listened without interruption, his amber eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "I'm sorry about Robert, about your house, about your son, but I'm not sorry you called me." "Why?" The question came out smaller than intended. He reached across the table and took my hand in his, still strong, still gentle, still able to make my heart race after all these years. "Because I never stopped loving you," he said quietly. "Because every deal I made, every success I achieved, every dollar I earned, it was all so I could be worthy of you when you finally came back to me. I know this sounds crazy. I know 40 years is a long time, and we're different people now. But when I heard your voice on that phone today, it was like the missing piece of my life finally clicked into place." I looked at our joined hands, his tanned and well-kept, mine worn by work and showing every day of my 65 years. "I'm not the girl you remember. You're better," he disagreed. "You're real. You've lived and loved and lost and survived. That 25-year-old girl was beautiful, but she was only potential. You are the woman that potential became." The words settled around my heart like a warm blanket, healing wounds I didn't even know I was still carrying. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt seen, not as someone's mother, or someone's wife, or someone's burden, but as myself. "What happens now?" I asked. Randall smiled. That same devastating smile that made me fall for him when the world was young. "Now we figure out what the rest of our lives look like together, if you'll have me." As I sat in his beautiful kitchen filled with good food and possibility, I realized that sometimes the fire that destroys your old life is just making room for the life you were always meant to have. Living with Randall was like discovering a version of myself I had forgotten existed. The first week was strange, tiptoeing around each other like polite strangers sharing space. He gave me the entire guest suite, a room larger than my old living room, a private bath with a tub that could fit 2 people, and a small sitting area overlooking his gardens. I felt like I was staying in a luxury hotel, afraid to touch anything or leave too much evidence of my presence. But Randall was patient, the way successful men learn to be. Gradually, I started to relax. He had a housekeeper, Maria, who came 3 days a week, but on the other days, I found myself cooking for him. It started small, making coffee in the morning, preparing simple lunches. But Randall appreciated everything with the enthusiasm of someone who had eaten catered food and restaurant meals for decades. "This is incredible," he said one evening, savoring the chicken and dumplings I'd made using my grandmother's recipe. "I haven't had a home-cooked meal like this in years." "It's nothing fancy," I protested. But inside, I glowed. When was the last time anyone had truly appreciated my cooking? David used to complain I made the same dishes repeatedly. Victoria once suggested I try more contemporary flavors for family dinners. Randall shook his head. "It's perfect." "You're perfect." That word perfect should have made me uneasy. I was 65, with gray roots showing, and expression lines that had become permanent grooves. My hands were spotted with age, my body soft in places that used to be firm. I was anything but perfect. But when Randall looked at me, I saw myself reflected in his eyes as someone beautiful, someone worthy of love and attention and gentle care. We fell into routines that felt as natural as breathing. We ate breakfast together on the back porch, where Randall reviewed business reports and I watched the birds at his elaborate feeders. We took afternoon walks around the property, where he showed me the gardens he'd planted himself and the greenhouse, where he grew orchids as a hobby. The evenings were for talking. We had 40 years to catch up on, and we did it slowly, carefully, like archaeologists examining precious artifacts. I told him how difficult it had been to lose Robert, about the emptiness of the house in the months afterward, about how I had to force myself out of bed every morning, about the loneliness of widowhood, the way people treat you like half a person once your husband is gone. He told me about his business, how it had grown from a small construction company to a development empire with projects in 3 states, about the women he dated over the years, accomplished women who looked perfect beside him at charity gala, but who never made him feel whole. "I always felt like I was waiting for something," he admitted one evening, as we sat on the back porch watching the sunset, "like my life was on pause until some crucial piece fell into place." And now, I asked. He reached over and took my hand. Now I feel like I can finally start living. 6 weeks after I moved in, David called. I almost didn't answer when I saw his name on the caller ID of the new phone Randall had bought me. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail, to let him wonder where I was, and whether I was okay. But I answered. Mom. His voice sounded uncertain, almost nervous. I've been trying to reach you. Your old number doesn't work. I had to get a new phone, I said simply. Everything burned. Remember, there was a pause. Where are you staying? I drove by the rest stop and they said you checked out weeks ago. I'm staying with a friend. What friend? Now his voice carried suspicion. You don't really have any friends left in Charlotte. The casual cruelty of that statement, the truth of it stung more than it should have. An old friend, I said coolly. Someone who was happy to help when I needed it. Another pause. I could practically hear him processing this information. Mom, I think we need to talk. Victoria and I have been discussing the situation, and we think maybe we were too hasty. Maybe you could stay in our guest room for a while, just until you get back on your feet. The offer that would have meant everything to me 6 weeks ago now felt hollow, insulting even. What changed your mind? I asked. Another pause. We realized that maybe we were too focused on our own needs. Families should stick together. What he meant, I realized, was that he'd probably heard through the neighborhood gossip network that his mother was no longer staying in a cheap hotel. Someone had mentioned seeing her with a well-dressed man in a nice car. David was curious, and curiosity had made him generous. That's very kind of you, I said, but I'm perfectly happy where I am. Mom, you can't just move in with a stranger. It's not safe. What do you even know about this person? I know he's never made me feel like a burden, I said quietly. I know he values my company and appreciates my cooking, and he tells me I'm beautiful every single day. Silence on the other end. Then, Mom, are you dating someone? Why does that surprise you, David? Did you think I was too old, too unattractive, too broken? That's not what I meant. I have to go, I interrupted. But thank you for the offer. It's nice to know you thought of me. I hung up before he could respond, my hands trembling slightly. Randall appeared in the doorway, concern etched on his face. Everything okay? David called, I said. Suddenly he wants me to stay with him. Randall's expression darkened. And what did you tell him? I told him I was happy where I am. I looked up at him. This man who had opened his home and his heart to me without hesitation. I am happy here, Randall. Happier than I've been in years, maybe ever. He crossed the room and pulled me into his arms. Then stay, he whispered against my hair. Stay forever. 3 months after that phone call from the hotel, Randall proposed. We were sitting on the back porch watching the sunset, a ritual we'd established. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the air was cool and perfect. Grace, he said, setting down his coffee cup. I've been thinking. That sounds dangerous, I teased. He smiled, but his expression was serious. I've spent 40 years building a successful business, accumulating wealth, creating a life that looks impressive on paper, but none of it meant anything because you weren't in it. My breath caught in my throat. These past few months with you have been the happiest of my life, not because of anything extraordinary we've done, but because of the ordinary moments: breakfast on the porch, walks in the garden, your laughter when I burn dinner, the way you hum while you're cooking. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I let you go once because I was too focused on becoming someone worthy of you. I'm not making that mistake again. He opened the box to reveal a stunning diamond ring, simple and elegant. Grace Thorne Roberts, will you marry me? Will you let me spend whatever time we have left making you as happy as you've made me? Tears streamed down my face as I nodded. Yes, yes, Randall, 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto my finger, perfect fit, as if it had been waiting 40 years for my hand. The wedding wasn't like my first one. When I married Robert 40 years ago, it was all about meeting expectations: white dress, church ceremony, reception at the community center with a DJ and cash bar. We invited everyone we knew and several people we didn't particularly like, because that's what you did. We performed the ritual for the community, not for ourselves. This time, Randall and I did exactly what we wanted. The ceremony took place in his backyard on a crisp November morning. 5 months after that phone call from the hotel, the pastor was an old friend of Randall's, and the only witnesses were Maria, the housekeeper, and Marcus, Randall's business partner and best friend of 25 years. I wore a simple blue dress that Randall said matched my eyes, and he wore a gray suit that made him look distinguished and handsome. No fuss, no fanfare, no stress about impressing anyone, just two people who had found each other again after 4 decades, promising to spend whatever time they had left together. David came to the wedding. I had debated whether to even invite him, but Randall convinced me to try one more time. "He's your son," he said simply. "You'll regret it if you don't give him a chance to make things right." So I called him 2 weeks before the ceremony. "Randall and I are getting married," I said without preamble. "November 15th at 2 p.m. You're welcome to come, but Victoria is not invited." He showed up alone, looking uncomfortable in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget used to be. He shook Randall's hand politely, made polite small talk, and even managed a strained smile when the pastor declared us husband and wife. But I could see the calculation in his eyes the way he took inventory of Randall's house, his car, the obvious markers of wealth. After the ceremony, as we were having champagne and cake on the back porch, David pulled me aside. "Mom, I need to apologize," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Victoria and we handled things badly. We should have been there for you." "Yes, you should have," I agreed calmly. "Maybe we can start over. Family dinners, holidays together." I looked at my son, this man I had raised and loved and sacrificed for, and felt a strange mixture of sadness and peace. "David, I'll always love you because you're my son, but you made it very clear where your priorities lie. You chose Victoria's comfort over your mother's desperate need. That's something I can't just forget." "But Mom, however," I continued, "I'm willing to work on rebuilding our relationship. Slowly, on my terms, starting with you understanding that Randall is my husband and you will treat him with respect." David nodded, looking relieved. "Of course, he seems like a good man." "He is. He's the best man I've ever known." I glanced over at Randall, who was laughing at something Marcus had said. He saw me at my lowest point and chose to love me anyway. That's more than I can say for some people. The words hung between us, and I watched David's face flush with shame. "I'll try to do better, Mom," he said quietly. "See that you do." This morning, I woke up in Randall's arms, in my husband's arms, in the room that became ours, in the house that became our home. Sunlight streamed through the windows overlooking the gardens we tend together, and I could smell the coffee Randall makes every morning before I waked at 66. I am happier than I've ever been, not because of Randall's money, or his beautiful house, or his success, but because someone sees, literally sees, me and chooses to love what he sees. The fire took my old life, it consumed everything, and turned it to ash. But sometimes, I think as I watch Randall read his morning paper across the breakfast table, destruction is just another word for renewal. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to find everything you truly needed. And sometimes, if you are very, very lucky, first love gets a second chance to become forever love. The business card I kept for 40 years is framed now, sitting on Randall's desk in his home office, a reminder that some promises are worth keeping, even when it takes 4 decades to fulfill them. Yesterday, I received a letter from David, not an email or a text, but an actual handwritten letter. In it, he apologized, truly apologized for turning me away. He explained that Victoria had been pressuring him about maintaining their space, that he'd been weak and chosen the easier path instead of the right one. He wrote that seeing me happy with Randall made him realize what he'd almost lost forever. "I'm not sure I'm ready to fully forgive him yet. Some wounds take time to heal." But I wrote back, inviting him to Sunday dinner next month, alone, just him, me, and Randall. A small step toward rebuilding what was broken. Randall found me on the porch this afternoon, reading David's letter for the 3rd time. "You okay?" he asked, settling into the chair beside me. "I think so," I said. It's strange. 6 months ago, I would have done anything for David to say these things. Now, I don't need his approval anymore. I don't need his validation. I have everything I need right here. Randall reached over and took my hand. "But you still love him, of course. He's my son. I'll always love him. But I've learned the difference between loving someone and needing them to make you feel whole." He squeezed my hand gently. "You're remarkable. You know that." I laughed. "I'm just a 66-year-old woman who finally figured out what matters. And what's that?" I turned to look at him, this man who had waited 40 years for me to find my way back to him. That sometimes the person you're meant to be with was there all along. You just had to travel a long road to get back to them. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "About Robert, about the years we lost." I thought about that for a moment. No regrets. Robert gave me stability when I needed it. He gave me David. Those years shaped me into the woman I am now. And maybe we needed to live those separate lives so we could appreciate what we have now. Randall pulled me close, and I rested my head on his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent. I love you, Grace Galloway, he murmured. I love you too, I whispered back, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. As the sun set over the gardens, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, I realized that my life hadn't ended when my house burned down. It had simply been transformed. Like the phoenix rising from the ashes, I had lost everything: my home, my possessions, my sense of security. My own son had rejected me when I needed him most. But, in that loss, I had found something infinitely more valuable. I had found myself, and I had found love, real deep, unconditional love, with a man who had never stopped believing in us. Some people spend their whole lives searching for their purpose, for their place in the world. I'm one of the lucky ones. At 66, I finally found mine, and it was worth the wait. Did you enjoy this story? Please let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. We love hearing how far our stories travel. If this story touched your heart, please consider sending a super thanks to help us continue creating meaningful content like this. Your support means the world to us. We have 2 more incredible life stories appearing on your screen right now that we think you'll love. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories. Thank you for being part of our community. See you in the next story. With love and respect.